catastrophe for the Palestinian people in 1948, when they were ethnically cleansed from their homeland, with hundreds of thousands forced to become refugees in other countries in order to make room for the projected new state of Israel. Recent events have obviously brought this issue into particularly sharp focus, because the ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarrah, the attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of course, the ongoing house demolitions, land theft, illegal settler activity, but now, of course, above all, this latest brutal attack on Gaza. But it's all part of the ongoing Nakba, which takes place on a daily basis and has been taking place every day for the last 73 years. So to understand the current events, the bombardment and destruction of Gaza, we have to understand that ongoing colonial process of expulsion of Palestinians from their land, and the theft of Palestinian land for illegal secular communities. And particularly what it means to the people who have lived there for generations, both those who still live there under Israeli apartheid, and those whose families were refugees and have settled in other countries, including the UK. So with that in mind, to give us a very personal impression, we hope, of what the Nakba meant to them, and to give us insights into this process, we have 5 speakers to talk tonight, all of whose families were victims of the Nakba. It should have been 6, but unfortunately, as a result of the current situation in Gaza and heightened tensions for Palestinians in Israel, the 6th speaker, Khalil Alamor, is unable to join us. I'll introduce the speakers we do have one by one, but just some comments about the format. Each speaker will have 8 minutes to speak, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to be very strict in holding you to that and bring it to a close, because we want to make sure that we have time for 30 to 35 minutes of questions at the end. In terms of asking questions, the easiest way to ask a question is to type it on the chat page on Zoom. And you can ask a question at any point. Our moderators will collect these questions and pass them on to the speakers when we get to that part of the webinar. If you would like to ask a question personally via the video link, you can use the hand symbol, which is under the reactions button at the bottom of the screen, and then in due course somebody will let you in. Another important point to say before we start is that we are asking for donations, which will all go to Palestinian charities, which will be chosen by the speakers. We're going to be putting up a link on the chat page so you could, which shows you where you can make a donation. I can introduce the first speaker, who is Bashar Nusaybi, who is from a Palestinian family tracing its roots back to 8th century Jerusalem, which has been the keepers of the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for over a millennium. Bashar grew up in Jordan and the UAE, and has worked as an academic in the UK and Ireland for over 30 years, including at the Open University, UCL, Imperial College London, the National Institute of Informatics Japan, and NASA in the USA. Bashar, over to you.
Thank you very much, James, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted, and equally delighted and terrified to give this short presentation. I'm a scientist and an academic, so I'm not quite used to giving presentations to this particular kind of audience. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about my own personal journey. Obviously, I don't cover the entire 73 years, but I was born in June 67, which was also an auspicious time for Palestinians. So perhaps my journey will start there. James mentioned my name, but actually I'd like to talk about something different rather than my surname, but my first name. So my first name is Bashar, which is means bearer of good news, which is very ironic given that I was born in June 67, a few days after the whole of Jerusalem was occupied and the Six-Day War ended. So the story behind that is that my parents, my father worked in the Jordanian army at the time as a pediatrician, as a doctor, and commuted between Jerusalem and Amman. And I was due to be born in Jerusalem, and my mother's obstetrician was there. But after the weekend, we sort of traveled back to, or my mother and my parents traveled back to Amman, and the war broke out, and they were never able to return. A few days later, we heard that all the family was okay and no one had been hurt, and hence my name as a small tiding of good news at the time. And I think this is probably was the start of a life which I consider I have been very, very lucky. So I feel myself being a very lucky Palestinian, and my story is not one that in any way compares to all the difficulties and tragedies that a lot of the Palestinian people have passed through. But at the same time, it's been touched by all of those tragedies throughout my life. So obviously 1967 was a very important year for me personally, but also, I mean, the fact that I actually was born in Jordan meant that I held a Jordanian passport, and for Palestinians who are who live in Palestine, you know, really appreciate the value of a passport. And so the first stroke of luck that I had was I had a passport, and lived and had a happy childhood in Jordan. Of course, there were some troubles in Jordan in the early 1970s, and a civil war, in fact, between the PLO and the Jordanian government. And so that touched us as well. But again, another stroke of luck, my father um, got a scholarship to study pediatrics in the UK. And we ended up moving to Edinburgh for a couple of years, where I spent my years in kindergarten and learning and getting the basics of English. So again, a difficulty that led to a good stroke of fortune. In the 1980s, my father was working in Abu Dhabi, and my sister managed to get to Lebanon, to the American University of Beirut, to study economics. And then a lot of things happened there, and the troubles there, and my sister was stuck in the middle of another conflict there. But again, stroke of luck, we were able to get her out, and because of her refugee status, she was able to get a scholarship and restart her studies at the University of Sussex in Brighton in the UK. So every time these conflicts have happened, I think there's been a positive element to them, so I feel very blessed that that's happened, and I can tell you more stories about the 90s and the Gulf War, and how my younger sister also managed to come to the UK as well, despite the troubles. The interesting thing is that it's very easy to become complacent and to have an attachment to the cause of the Palestinians, but not having experienced it, you always feel that there's an imposter in you that is trying to talk about the Palestinian issues, but at the same time not having experienced those difficulties. So I've often wavered about how to get engaged on both the Palestinian side and also as an advocate for the Palestinians with other communities. But one thing that I have really enjoyed is actually being a scientist and being an academic. And so the path to advocating the cause for me has been through my own profession. Over the years, I've been able to build up a career in academia and to meet many scientists in technology and in engineering. And one of the things that I've discovered is of course, there are many people who are, let's say, are unaware of the issues of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or who are strong advocates and supporters of Israel. And this is a community that us as Palestinians don't often reach, or don't actually have an opportunity to engage with. So I've used some of my access to try and make the case through my profession and through my discipline. And in a sense, my message, or one of my messages today, is how we can move from awareness to engagement. It's actually come at a really bad time, because at the moment, the politics is really dominating the discourse. But actually, in reality, I think the Palestinian issue is one that also needs to be dealt with in ways that engage and influence, and go beyond the awareness. So it's wonderful. I was hearing you discuss before this talk about the demonstrations and so on, and awareness is really quite important and is a key factor in this. But we also have to get to the decision makers and the influencers, and many of them are also working in government, in science, and in many professions that perhaps we don't reach as much as we ought to. Another observation, and I'm not sure how my time is. I forgot to start my timer.
We've got about 1.5 minutes.
Okay, so I'll just be very quick about this because it's a rather theoretical point, which is we all have multiple social identities. So I'm very much a Palestinian, but I'm also a family member. I'm also a football supporter. I'm also an academic. And these multiple identities all play a part in how I behave in the different circumstances. And it's very important for us as Palestinians or advocates for Palestinians to try and understand who and what identity our interlocutors are in, and to try and adapt some of our discourse so that we are able to engage with them better. Sometimes if we're able to do that, then I think we have much more leverage in some of our conversations in terms of engagement. And it's very hard to persuade someone of your argument if you don't quite understand their own social identity. I'd like to just finish off by saying, you know, my father was born and grew up in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, and went to school there. And I don't know if you can see it, but there is actually a street called Nusayba in Jerusalem, and I've never visited there, but I'm just gives me a warm fuzzy feeling and confirms my social identity when I see that. But he grew up in a very affluent part of Jerusalem, in which actually a lot of the Palestinians have not succumbed to some of the atrocities of the Israelis over the years, and to some extent, I've always felt safe that is not something that that my house is not under threat, and so on. So it's quite ironic, in the same way as I started what I was going to say by saying my name is ironic. The fact that actually I'd like to finish with a little poem that I read that always resonates with me when I think how these difficulties have now come to Sheikh Jarrah. And it's by a poet, or by a theologian and pastor, a German theologian and pastor called Martin Niemöller. And I'm sure a lot of you will have heard this before. It says, "First they came for the communist, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me." And I think I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bashar. Next speaker is Iyas Al-Kazem. Iyas's father was studying in the UK when his family were expelled from their homes in Jerusalem and exiled to Beirut. And Iyas is going to tell us the story of his father, who went on to be a founder member of the PLO and write the Palestinian Basic Law. Iyas runs a charity for Palestinian children called Hope and Play, is chair of the Richmond and Kingston branch of the PSC, and sits on the PSC's executive committee. So Iyas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and thank you everyone for making the time to join us today. It's 4 days after the Nakba commemoration. It's especially resonant this year. I was wondering how to start this, but I'm going to start with something intensely personal. It is a personal thing. On the 7th of January this year, I buried my father in Valencia at the age of 95. He was born in 1925. He was born in a village called Haris. Haris is a small village outside of Nablus. And he was buried in Valencia, several thousand miles away. About 15 months earlier, a very dear friend of his, Hamdi Abdel Majid, was buried in Dubai, similar age, also born in Nablus. And about a year before that, I flew to Toronto to bury Ammi Abdel Rahim, who was from Safad, but died in Toronto and was buried there. And about 2 years before that, I buried Ammi Hilmi Samara, who's from a village called Nakba by Tulkarim, and he was buried in Wallington, just by Croydon. That's the diaspora. All of those people were very, very close friends. In fact, they went to the same school together in Jerusalem at around the same time. But the diaspora meant that the Nakba meant that set of 5 very close friends ended up being buried in 5 countries scattered around the world. And that scattering is reflected in those of us who've survived them. I have a brother who lives in Philadelphia. My sister was in Dubai. My other brother was in Canada but has now come to the UK. And my mother was with my father in Spain. I have cousins in Amman in Jordan, in Damascus in Syria, in Ramallah in Palestine, and in the UAE. And that's the very real consequence of what happens when people are forcibly ejected from their country. Essentially what happens is we've all ended up where we were able to get a passport. That's really the harsh, brutal truth of it. My sister didn't manage to get a British one, so she spent some years in Canada where passports were easier to get to, and then went to live in Dubai. And that's that's a very, very typical story, and it reflects what Bashar was saying earlier about, kind of that sense of displacement. You're not really from. We're all Palestinian, but we're all from everywhere. And that's quite a harsh thing. My father was born, as I said, in Haris. At the age of 5, he used to walk to school, which was a 1.5 hour walk to school and back. But he always used to tell me that he was safe walking to school at the age of 5 because his brother used to take him, and his brother was 7, so that was okay. And they used to go to this school until my grandfather, my father's father, organized for a sheikh who would come to Haris and in a room in the cemetery there created a school for the children locally so they didn't have to walk the 1.5 hours to the next village. My mother, by contrast, was born in Jerusalem and had a fairly standard education in Jerusalem. In fact, her grandfather set up one of the first all-girls schools in Jerusalem. This was at a time when in a lot of countries in the West, female education was still not really a thing. So it's, all of these myths about what was and wasn't in Palestine before. The reality is there was a society, there was a civilized society that was doing many things that were, in a lot of ways, more civilized than many other parts of the world. My father was sent, as James mentioned, he came to the UK around 1946. He was one of 60 or 70 scholars sent on a scholarship by the British government to come and study in the UK. With the intent that they would come back and form a cadre that would be the technocrats on whom the state of Palestine would be built. Unfortunately, that clearly never happened. And while he was here in the UK, the Nakba happened. In his street in Jerusalem, it was street-to-street fighting with the immigrant Jewish population. And what was happening was, whenever one street would hear that the next street was fighting against the militias, the Jewish militias, the young men of that street would all go and fight them in the next street wherever the fighting was, and it was really street to street. My father's father had passed away by this point, and as I say, my father was in the UK. My grandmother, his mother, was very much in Jerusalem with my uncles and aunts, 2 uncles and 2 aunts. And during the street fighting that was going on in Jerusalem at the time, my uncles were out in the streets collecting the wounded and bringing them back to my grandmother's house, where my aunts were tending to them, were nursing them. And my grandmother, who I remember, she was probably about 4'11", just short of 5 foot, a tiny little lady. Her hands couldn't have been any bigger than this. Eternally with a smile on her face. She passed away when I was 12, but I don't remember her having any expression other than a smile on her face. And this amazing, delicate woman, in 1948, while her children were out getting the wounded into the house, had managed to get hold of a machine gun and was firing cover from the balcony for her children while they were collecting the wounded. Which is some burden to place on any mother, right? But again, the reality is, what mother wouldn't do what it takes to protect her children? And that's what my grandmother was doing. My My mother, on the other hand, was had left. She was 7 years old in the Nakba, and they'd left Jerusalem just after the Deir Yassin massacre. The Deir Yassin massacre sent a message, a wave through the Palestinian population that if the Jewish militias were to come to your place, you would be massacred, you would be raped, and so don't hang around. And so my grandfather, before returning to fight, took his family out of West Jerusalem where they were and then came back. My father, meanwhile, in London, didn't know anything about his mother and his siblings. There was no way, clearly no internet, no mobile phones, scarcely landlines. And so he didn't know for 6 months what was happening. Whereas my grandmother, on the other hand, knew that he was okay because he'd managed to get himself a job at the BBC reporting foreign service. And so she would, as my uncle tells it, she would take the radio out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and just put it wherever they happened to be to listen to hear her son and know that he was still okay. And this was on their journey was to first to Tripoli in Lebanon and then on to Damascus. And my father in the UK, who didn't know what was going on, was just gathering clothing and donations in London and trying to get them sent over to the refugees in Palestine, not knowing whether his mother and siblings were amongst those refugees or indeed whether they were alive. I think I'm coming up. Well, I think I've just gone through my 8 minutes. It's if I can finish with just a connection from that. I mean, the Nakba is very much alive. I wanted to focus on my parents' story because they lived it. We still live it through the telling. It makes the hair stand on the back of my neck whenever I tell the story because I can envisage exactly what they were going through. But the Nakba is very much still alive. And it's not just alive in the diaspora, as Bashar mentioned, although it is alive there because we're all here. I wouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here. Just as Mr. Bashar shouldn't have been born in Amman, I should have been born in Nablus. I should not have been born in Libya and then come here for whatever reason. But it's not in the diaspora, just in the diaspora. It is also in what's happening on the ground. And I'm sure Dr. Salim will allude to some of what's happening later. But I just want to leave you with something which I'm thinking of my grandmother here and what a mother had to go through to defend her children. And through the charity which I run, which is mostly in Gaza, I'm in contact with people in Gaza. And one of the most recurrent conversations right now between the mothers in Gaza is, where shall we sleep at night and where shall we put our children to sleep at night? And it's a very real question. The mothers are saying, do I and my 3, 4, 6 children sleep in one room together so that if the missile comes in, if it hits our room, we all go, but if it doesn't hit our room, we all survive? Do I spread my children around the house so that if the missile hits the house, only one of my children goes? Or maybe I go and the others survive? That's a question no mother should ever have to ask. But that's the question that's being asked every night by the mothers today in Gaza. And it's just a continuum of the Nakba, where my grandmother had to decide to bear arms and fire cover for her children. And that's really all I had to say. Thank you for allowing me to overrun by a couple of minutes, James.
That's okay. Thanks for that. A very moving description. Moving on to the next speaker, we now have Massa Dalkamouni, who is a mother of 2 and the daughter of a Palestinian mother whose family were forced to leave the Palestinian city of Safad in 1948, subsequently settling in Syria and later on in Jordan, although still maintaining a strong belief that they will go back. Massa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Bashar, as well as Iyas, for sharing your story, and our condolences for your father's loss and relatives as well. I don't know where to start after hearing those stories because I'm a second generation. So my mother, her parents left, so it was my grandparents' story. So I didn't really live the story myself, but unbelievably, or I have it's I have the great feeling of frustration towards this issue, as well as I have lots of anger coming down from generation to generation. So they sent me the highlights saying that, oh, I need to talk about the family in 1948, the Nakba, and focus on my own journey. And when I started thinking about my own journey going into this, I thought I cannot really personalize this story at all. It's a journey where it's extremely common for thousands and thousands of Palestinians. A journey that what Iyas shared, what Bashar shared, we all shared part of. So it's so common, and the burning feeling of injustice. It's a journey of injustice that goes down from generation to generation. And what is what was actually, or what is really puzzling, is that the flame of the injustice feeling is just growing further and further. I believe that by if the states thought that they can bury this feeling of injustice, I think that what happened now in Hay Jarrah proved that it's beyond to be buried by any generation. On the contrary, it grows bigger and bigger. So I actually had the chance to go and visit Palestine a couple of years ago. I heard a lot about what is happening there, about the discrimination. I heard from my grandparents how they ran away, as yes, grandparents and parents actually had to run away because they had no other option. It was a survival thing. They knew that they're going to die. They knew their kids might be raped. They knew their homes won't be safe. So they had to run away. And I can only imagine people there now thinking about how the kids would sleep at night, or if they would wake up having them beside them, or seeing Muhammad al-Hadidi today. I don't know if you watched, losing all his family, almost only having the baby, one baby left and maybe one other child, losing 5 kids and his wife. I could just imagine my grandparents thinking of losing their kids and just running away, and I could not blame them at all. And seeing what's happening now, I understand what happened before, but there was no media. It was just really happening. It wasn't, because now what we saw, thank God for the media we have. So I understand the pain, but I never understood the injustice. I always had the feeling that there was something unjust, but when I went there, I saw it in my own eyes. Just going through Quds, cutting the borders, going to Haifa, Yafa, Akka. I saw unbelievable sight. We went to visit this family, and they were actually they were not allowed to have cement to rebuild their house, and it was really a legal issue. You cannot just renovate your house at any time, and that you would be really, it would be a crime to do this. I never understood this. Just to see the kids in my own eyes standing on the borders, just to go with their parents to do the simplest things, cutting the border from one side to one side, that would take them 4 or 5 hours. Instead, if they only wanted to walk, they would just be there in 20 minutes. Is just extremely unfair and unjust. So I don't know exactly how to express my feelings towards this issue, but what I know is that my own kids hold the same feeling of injustice. I feel that it's so huge that it cannot only stop at one generation at any time, starting with Nakba, starting with what Iyas talked about, starting with the pain the Palestinians had in Deir Yassin, where hundreds were killed, where 600 people had to flee the village in really by sunset. Just thinking I would either die or I have to run away is just so extremely brutal. So how did this affect me and my family? It affected us tremendously because our parents were never settled. My mother, she always had this feeling that they're gonna go back. And we always had the struggle inside that it's really that close. It's an hour drive from our home, and it's the home of my mom, and I really can't ever visit there. She has relatives, and I couldn't visit there, except if you have, a Canadian passport or an American passport, and you're lucky enough to just go through the borders. Other than that, it would be extremely difficult. And I always wondered, and this is a question I always say, like why? This is not, they did not come and they did not immigrate to really find peace and live together with Palestinians. We know that the cause that they came for is just to get everyone else out. And this was very clear in Deir Yassin, with the killing, with the raping, with what they've done to take the people to West Jerusalem and then get them back to kill them again. So I believe that it's a huger case than, it's not a case of a land. I think it's more of a case of dignity, fairness. It's a case of humanity. And I think if humanity do not stand up for Palestinians, not because they belong to Palestine or they belong to the land, but because they are humans, then humanity is not here anymore. And that's the case for me. It's I thought I had more time to share. I wanted to share more, but I think I'm done with the time, so I don't want to overtake more time from you. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Masa. Our next speaker is Fatima Hello. Her family were forced to flee Palestine in 1948. She was born and grew up in the Shatila refugee camp in Lebanon, where she witnessed the infamous 1982 massacre. She now lives in the UK and is a documentary filmmaker and visits the camps in Lebanon regularly and campaigns to improve conditions there. Fatima, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me in this meeting, public meeting, which really appreciated. Let me just start with my PowerPoint. Actually, I would like to share with you. I'm not sure if I am able to share it. 1 second. Share. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint? Can you see it? Yeah, thank you. Well, it's an endless journey, and many of the speakers today they talk about their account, and it is applicable for everyone. It's like applying for all the Palestinians, the same story and similar stories here and there. So I would like to start with my family background for the endless journey of the Nakba, the catastrophe. So my family from Haifa, as a town called El Yajur, which is now a kibbutz area called Yagar, they call it. My family fled from Haifa in the 25th of April, 1948. And today we are in the May 2021. So I've heard the story from my family, how they lived in Palestine, in Haifa, in Al Yajur. My father was working in, this is Al Yajur before 1948, in Al Carmel Mount Al Carmel. And this is what remains from the town. This is a station, a station used to be, a train station used to be during the Ottoman Empire. And that's what remains from this, from the town. And this is the town in 2014. So my father was in Haifa working in the refinery factory, oil factory, which is a petrol oil factory, was running by the British mandate, and it was running also by the Iraqi, they call it the Iraqi refinery. My father was working in it, and during the confrontation between the Jews and Palestinians before the 1948, my father was working there, and they had lots of riots between them, and they were fighting because they wanted to take over the Haganah Zionist gangs and these Zionist settlers who came during the British Mandate. What happened in the 25th of April 1948, actually, my family fled when the Haganah Zionist gang entered the town of El Yajour. This is the street where they were. And my parents' house is just behind this mosque, and these orchards, actually one of them belonged to the family. So they had to flee from Haifa to Shfa Amir, and then from Shfa Amir to another, from place to place until they reach Horfesh. Horfesh is a town close to the border of Lebanon, and they had to climb this mountain to arrive into the border of Lebanon. My mother was pregnant and she was expected at the time, so she had split from her family, and she went to Tarshiha with her cousin, a midwife. By that time, the British officer actually saw her, and he asked her, "Where are you going?" And she said, "I'm going to join my family." He asked her, "Where are you from? Where about, which town you are from?" She said, "From El Yajour." And he said, "Oh yeah, I know. Your people now arrived into the border of Lebanon in Horfesh. I'll take you there." While the journey from Tarshiha into Horfesh by the jeep, the British jeep, they were stopped by the settlers, by the Haganah settlers, and they wanted to kill my mother. My mother was, teenager at the time, and she was shouting, screaming, but the British officer was fighting, and, the settlers were shouting at them, and he was, saying F Arab and stuff like that, screaming and shouting and, swearing. So the officer, the British officer, managed to pass them from the area of the settlements until they reached Horfesh. At that time, they started, killing the Palestinians. So they had to flee and climb this mountain here. And when they arrived into the border of Lebanon, my mother was expected. So she had to deliver her first baby girl, under a tent was provided by the Lebanese army, the border Lebanese army. When my father went to them and he said, I want you actually to help us. My wife is delivering the baby. But unfortunately, my older sister died after a few months because of the malnutrition that she had suffered. The next one, the condition of the camp. So they settled in Shatila refugee camp, where my sibling and I born. And this is the condition of the camp now. What you see here, people are electrocuted. People have no right to work, have no work even to become citizen, or like to practice 79 jobs in Lebanon. They are living in really bad situation. The UNRWA is not now helping anything with the medical. They had to go sometimes to private Lebanese hospitals, and mostly they will die in the accident and emergency because they cannot pay for their treatments. The massacres happened actually, I'll just give you some examples. In 1982, actually, we had the massacre of Sabra and Shatila. I was 10 years old. So we had, after like Deir Yassin, 1940s, the Jarash, that being, the Palestinians been through, Tal Zatar in 1976, Shatila, and the camps war. All of these, what you have seen here, we have experienced a member of our family, that died. I was 10 years old when I was forced to walk on this Abu Muhammad al-Dukhi dead bodies. He was handicapped, and they forced us to walk on the dead bodies. We managed to escape, but many they did not make it, and they died. What happened today, or a few days of the Gaza, in compared to what's happening to Gaza? I've seen Hatab family who were in Shati refugee camp died. I've got a video for them. They were shouting, screaming, and they saying, "Please God, save us." And few minutes later, I got these photos from them. This applied to me when I lost my brother during the camps war in 1985-88. We had a family called Saad family. They were our neighbor, and there were 13 of them. All of them were actually at home when they bombarded and they killed. The only at 5 o'clock in the morning. After a few hours, the only survivor was the 3 years old, who came to our house full of shed of blood, all of his body, because he was he was hiding at his bathroom when they bombarded the house, and he is the only survivor. In compare of Abu Hatab family, I remember the family, what happened to us. So it applies to us what's happening in Palestine. I would like to talk about the Palestinians who are Arab Israeli now in Israel, sitting like living in the city Haifa, Akka, and all of these things. I've got a friend in Haifa.
Sorry, Fatima, can I ask you to wrap up now, please?
Yeah, okay. Who actually sent me all of this, shouting and screaming, like what's happening to them, and practicing terrorized by the Israelis. I would like also to compare it with the Sheikh Jarrah, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. Why Sheikh Jarrah, and why it's applying for us as refugees and as Palestinians. It applies for us because Sheikh Jarrah, what's happening now had happened to us before. And it is very close to the Al-Aqsa mosque. If you see it here in Arabic, that's Al-Aqsa mosque, and this is Al-Hayy Jarrah, Sheikh Jarrah. And if they become controlling all of these areas, then they are going to split Jerusalem from both sides, and they will be able to control also the Al-Aqsa, where they wanted to control, and they wanted to build their temple. So every Israeli city was once a Sheikh Jarrah, and it applies to us. What we are looking for is just, we need our right, our human right, and it's crime against humanity what's happening, and we want our right of return. We want justice. So to end with, we want to breathe since 1948. Thank you for listening, and I wish if I could just explain a little bit of many things happening. And if you have any question, please do ask.
Well, hopefully it'll be possible to address a few things during the question session. Anyway, thanks very much for that. So now we move on to our final speaker, Dr. Salim Anati, who is medical director of the UNRWA hospital in Al Shufat refugee camp on the outskirts of East Jerusalem. It's the only hospital serving a population of some 22,000 refugees. Dr. Salim is chair of the Al Quds Charitable Society, which provides special education and assistance for those living with disabilities in the camp. So Salim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, 8 minutes are not enough to speak about 73 years of sufferings. Anyhow, Israeli says elderly Palestinians will die and young Palestinians will forget the Nakba, which is not true, because we are living Nakba daily and every day. My story started from 1948 after the war, when my parents lost their homeland in Lod, where is now Ben Gurion Airport. My parents, my family were farmers. They used to cultivate vegetables, fruits, everything in their homeland, but it was stolen by the Israelis, and they were forced to leave Lod, and through a long way by foot from Lod, they arrived to Jerusalem, and they lived in the old city, which in a part now it's called the Jewish quarter. Before 67, it was called Muaskar. Muaskar was meaning shelter for refugees. And we lived there. I was born in Jerusalem, in the old city, in that quarter. In 66, UN with the United Nations and the Jordanian government decided to move all Palestinians who were living in the old city and to move them to Shafat refugee camp, where we are living now. At that time, we were 500 families. Nowadays, as you mentioned, 22,000 refugees just in the area of the camp. But if you include surrounding areas, the population reach about 70,000 people. Now we are living in a miserable conditions. We are living in a big prison. We have just checkpoint surrounding us from all directions, and we have just one entrance to go in and to go out through that point, and it is protected by the Israel border police, where there are many confrontations and clashes and problems with the people. The situation is miserable in the camp. Infrastructure is bad, and facilities are not available. Also, although we are part of Jerusalem by Israel law and the international law, the area of the camp is part of East Jerusalem. And the 40% of the population, they have a Jerusalem ID card, which means that they are part of Jerusalem. But the problem is that Israel municipality and Israel authorities are neglecting the camp and creating a lot of problems in the camp. The camp is facing a lot of raids by Israel police and security, and the targeted group is the young people. I was having a private clinic in the camp before I worked with UNRWA. At home, I used to treat all casualties who were shot or beaten by Israel police at home. And until now, I am the only doctor who was available all the time in the camp, treating and helping patients, helping all cases who are shot or beaten by Israel soldiers. And in the last years, with this society that we formed in the camp, which is called Al-Quds Charitable Society for Disabled and Rehabilitation, we are also providing care and medical aids for patients and Palestinians, especially young people, like providing crutches, walkers, wheelchairs, who are paralyzed or who are having broken bones. And the camp is under the pressure of Israel army. Israel police is attacking the camp day and night. Now we are having clashes on the checkpoint because of what is going on in Gaza. There are many Palestinians from the camp who died shot by Israel police. Hundreds are in prison, especially our young people. And in the last days, we are noticing that they are targeting the upper part of the body, and we have more than 15 kids who lost their eyes because of what is it called, the rubber bullets. And during my activities and my work in the camp, I was shot by a voice bomb in my thigh, which has caused a deep hematoma, and I was at hospital for 2 weeks. But thank God I am recovered, and I am still facing the Israel activities, and I am still having this help to my people in the camp. Although I could have a better life. I am a doctor. I can move out of the camp and have better life. But I feel that it's my responsibility to help and to give what I can for my people in the camp. And I do my best to provide the needs of the people in the camp by addressing friends and international organizations and centers outside of Palestine to help us in our activities and in our programs that we are doing to enhance the general situation of the people in the camp. I want to mention a story that happened with my mother. A few years ago, we went to Lod, just as tourists, because we are not allowed to be there, to live there. My mother said that she wants to have a glass of water from her house. We went to the house and we knocked on the door. A Jewish settler came out and my mother asked him a glass of water, and she starts to explain the details of the house. And she said that there is a well in the middle and, you know, all the details of the house and the windows, everything. But the settler closed the door and told her, this is my house, go away from here. And my mother went in depression. And later, a few months later, she died of this event. What I want to say that we are living in bad conditions, but we have our faith and we have our hope in peace and justice, and dream of one day we will be able to return back to our homeland. And this is the message that I got it from my parents, and I am giving it to my children, that never give up and be optimist that future will be better for us as Palestinians, and hope of peace and justice will not end. And with this, we keep survive and we keep live in this life. This is in short about my story. And we are facing occupation until now. We didn't leave our land, but the problem is it's a strange feeling when you feel you are a refugee in your own land, in your own territory, in your own country. You can't move, you can't do whatever you want, you have limited access wherever you go. You will be beaten, you will be shot, you will be asked to present your ID. Sometimes they don't allow you to go out, or sometimes they stop you on the checkpoint for no reason.
Sorry, Salim, can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes. Yes. So what I'm saying that our life is very bad, and our life is different because we are living in the situation of refugee life in the camp, in a crowded area. Population is very high. Average of the families, the children is 7.7 children. And we have a young generation, population, 70% of the population are under the age of 17. So we are a young generation, and we still fight for our existence. We still hope of peace and justice, and one day we will be able to return to our homeland in the cities and towns that we were forced to leave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salim.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody for such moving presentations. So now we have a bit of time for the question session. So again, just to remind people that they can put their questions into the chat, or else if you can stick your electronic hand up via the reactions button, and then you will be called to ask a question. So I'm now going to pass the meeting over to Hilary and Fiona, who will be handling the questions.
Right, I can't see any questions in the chat as such. Would anybody like to raise their hand and ask a question? Yes. Could you unmute, please?
Is that any better?
That's better.
Hi, I'm Rukia. I have a question to all of you, basically, from what I've been hearing from the news since last couple of weeks about the bombing, especially in Gaza. So it makes me think that how different will it be this time compared to the last time when it happened back in 2014, and also back in 2006 after the siege of Gaza. So we are all, I mean, making noises, and I mean, it's good that people are showing solidarity with the Palestinian people, but how different will it be this time? Anyone?
I'll kick off if no one else. I'll kick off with just a couple of observations. I mean, first of all, obviously, what ends up happening off the back of this is anybody's guess. But it's anybody's guess, but it's also in our hands, because this is where I come back to where we started about the demonstrations that are happening in the UK and around the world. So we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but what we can do is try to influence that by getting out there, making our voices heard, being in the streets, contacting our MPs, doing all of the actions, the civil actions that will mean that our governments will start to listen, or will have to be listening to what we say. So that doesn't answer your question with regards to how will it be different, because I don't know. But what I do know is it's in our hands to do something about that. My second thing is just an observation about how it feels different on the ground. As I mentioned, I have a number of friends in Gaza, and I'm sure every Palestinian who's on this, their WhatsApp channel is showing things that just don't make it onto any kind of medium, because we're all seeing what's going on the ground, and it's horrific. And what I know, my main partner in Gaza, who delivers most of our projects, our children trauma projects there, who's an amazing man, a Christian man in Gaza, who during the last bombardment was rounding up volunteers to take children away from the center of the cities and into open areas where they could try to distract them to play, so that they wouldn't, if at all possible, or they would minimize the impact of the warplanes going overhead. What he's saying, and he's clearly been through both 2014 and 2008, 2009, he is saying that this is the first time he's kind of felt fearful for himself as he's carrying on with his work. It feels more vicious than it's felt before. And God knows before it was vicious. So that's the feeling that I'm getting from on the ground in Gaza. I don't know if any of the other speakers want to.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that. Well, first of all, what's happening, it has been happening for many years, but it comes like bits and pieces from here and there. Like in Gaza, sometimes we've seen bombarding Gaza and claiming that they are attacking Hamas people, between brackets, and then we see sometimes, confrontation in the West Bank and killing people, or like, making the life of Palestinians or hell, or like, settlers going and doing what they want and building these, rebuilding settlement area and all of these things. But this time, the Palestinian and everywhere, sometimes there is internally there are lots of confrontation between factions. However, this time this is not the case. It's not about Hamas, I would say. It's not about Fatah. It's not about any all of these Palestinians faction. It is about Palestine. It is about the people who are being killed every single day in Palestine, and even in Israel, who are called Arab Israelis. Now they don't feel safe. They are being attacked, and I'm hearing from them what they're saying. They're saying that some of these unknown groups of settlers coming to their houses, attacking them. They put like a sign, something with a sign that they are going to come back and attack them. This is an Arab house. The Jerusalem Al-Aqsa actually is like, it's like they put it, it is the hot potato in the hand. If you are attacking, if you are attacking our religion, this is about our religion. This is not right. And all these things, what's happening, is applying to every single Palestinians, because what you have heard from us today, we are from different, you know, from the community, from the Palestinian community, and we come from different background, but we have the same story. Al-Jarrah, Sheikh Jarrah issue is applicable for every single Palestinian in the Green Line in 1948, in the West Bank, in Gaza, in the refugee camps. Where if Al-Sheikh Jarrah now started with the Sheikh Jarrah, that means they are going to be next in another places in Palestine to kick them out. But the point is, if they kick them out, where are they going to go? There is no place to go. Are they going to experience the same, you know, destiny that we have been through, or we still have, you know, experience being in refugee camps, being massacred, murdered, or in diaspora, humiliated, and all of these things. So it is applying for every single Palestinian, and that's why it is different. If they are talking about Hamas, they're claiming that it is about Hamas, but it's not about Hamas. If you want, I don't agree with Hamas. I don't support Hamas as Palestinian, maybe others, but like me, I don't support, I never supported them. If they are taking it as Hamas things in Gaza, it's not about Hamas. If they want to attack Hamas people, they're saying, we are in the border, come and fight us. Why they are killing the Palestinians, the innocent Palestinians in their houses, while they are demolishing those high buildings with the economic, you know, destroying our economic side, Palestinian economical, you know, side. So this is why it is different. This is why now it is different. But in the media, and we're hearing them, if you talk about your issue now, they're saying you are anti-Semitic. We want to breathe. Come on, we want to speak about our right. It's not about Hamas. It's about our right as Palestinians. I have a right to go back to Haifa. Other people have the right to go back into their ancestral land. So that is the issue now. And what's happening on the ground is the issue. And we have nothing actually to lose now. We have nothing. We did everything, the negotiation, the agreement, the peace process, and all. We've been through all of these things. And we found nothing. We came back into the zero. So that's now, if you ask any Palestinian, they say, we don't care. We are uprooted, and that's
Dr. Salim, I think you wanted to comment on the question too.
Yeah, there are two main important points for what is the motivation of these things now are happening. You know, first one is the displacement of the Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah, which will repeat the same story of 1948. And as Fatima said, these Palestinians, where they will go, where they will live, this one. And the other one is it's more religious because of the raids, of the barbaric raids of the settlers attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque daily under protection of Israel police. Because we know why they are doing this, because as they believe and they say, they think that their temple should be replacing Al-Aqsa Mosque. And these were the main two points or two reasons for what is going on and what has happened in the last few days. Thank you.
Can I follow up, Dr. Salim, with a question that's related to this from Marwan, who's asking, after the failure of Oslo and the two-state solution, is it possible that a one-state solution could
No, never ever. One state is not accepted. We want our freedom. We want to live as human beings, and we want to feel that we have our land. We want to feel free to move to work. We want just simple human rights to survive and to have our freedom and to feel that we are an independent nation, because we were and we must and we have to be. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
answer this question.
We have a question from Deborah. Where do we direct advocacy? The UN seems ineffectual, the US totally oblivious to the injustice. So I don't know which speaker might like to respond to that?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Could you please repeat?
The question is, who should we be appealing to now? The UN doesn't seem to be taking any action. The US government also doesn't seem to recognize the injustice. So what should those people who are concerned, supporting the cause of the Palestinians, who should we be addressing our protests to?
I had a perspective, but before I do, I'm aware, Masaya, do you want to come in before I'm aware we haven't had you come in on any, or you, Bashar, would either of you like to address that?
Well, I suppose I did have one thing to say, which is I think in the long term, it has to be through influencing policy. I mean, I think policy, of course, is affected by public outrage, by public feeling, and by public sentiment. But we need to have more challenge to change policy. And that's really, really challenging. And that's a long-term process. And I'm not sure, it's really hard. I'm referring specifically to the UK context where there are mechanisms to do that. But we, in terms of the numerical advantage of the case in terms of affecting policy is very imbalanced, even in the UK. It's very hard to, I mean, writing to MPs is one thing, but I think it needs to be much deeper. And I've mentioned roots, for example, in terms of science and research in academia. Academia actually, in general, certainly in my discipline, is very much in favor of the Palestinians. But actually, the science itself, some of the leaders in our disciplines are either, well, I mean, not. There's a lot of Jewish scientists, Israeli scientists who are actually heavily embedded in the scientific community. And if we are thinking of a very long-term solution, then I think we need to find ways in which we can actually reach those kinds of people. My PhD supervisor happens to, my former PhD supervisor was actually currently the chief scientific advisor on national security to the UK. So it took me 35 years to get to this position, but it's actually a really useful line of influence. I don't know how influential I am, and I don't try to advocate when I actually talk to him about this topic. It's actually him understanding me over 35 years. He trusts me and he trusts my opinions, and I trust his. And we disagree on so many things, but we have enough, we have an open challenge that we can we can talk about it. And actually, I'm happy to mention his name. His name is Anthony Finkelstein. So, you know, it's a sort of a very interesting channel to have access to. But, you know, it's a lone voice and it's a single conversation. If we could have multipliers of this, especially for the younger generation who are looking for ways to engage, then those are the kinds of things in their own disciplines. How can they actually try and find channels to influence policy?
May I expand on that, Fiona?
No, I wondered if Dr. Salim wanted to come back in there on this. Do you want to comment on this this issue about advocacy?
Yes. We don't rely a lot on politics and on governments. Our hope that people, simple people on the streets can have a big influence on their governments, on their syndicates. And we as Palestinians living here in the occupied territories, we are very happy when we see marches, when we see demonstrations in all Europe and all the world supporting us. This gives us more energy and more hope in peace. And we know that the governments, they have their private interest, but we have the interest with the nations, with the people, simple people like you, to share and support us. This is a great step for our independence and for our rights that we will sure later we will be able to get it. Thank you.
Can I just add in there? You may, as you know, there've been a lot of demonstrations around the world, and in London last week we had probably about 150,000 people marching in London. What was very noticeable for those of us who attend these regularly was, first of all, how many of the demonstrators were Palestinian, and how many of them were young people. And it's the first time that I've seen so many Palestinians and probably people from other parts of the world demonstrating. Hilary, do you want to pick on one?
Yes, I think, John, you've had your hand up.
Thank you, Hilary, and good evening, everybody. And thank you very much for all the extraordinary testimony we've heard this evening. And hello, Ayas. We met a few years ago at one of your meetings. I wrote a book a few years ago about Palestinian citizens of Israel, and one of the wonderful people I interviewed was actually Khalil Alamour, who sadly can't be with us this evening. But it struck me that, given obviously the absolutely grotesque horror, and I haven't probably seen the coverage that Ayas referred to in WhatsApp, etc., just what's on the general media, and that's grotesque enough of what's happening in Gaza and in Sheikh Jarrah. But what has really struck me, and I wonder if this is affecting hopefully international opinion, but also how it affects the Palestinian street feeling, if you like, is the events, the riots, the attacks on Palestinian citizens of Israel in towns like Lod and Haifa and Acre, etc. A friend of mine from Haifa, a Palestinian woman, emailed this morning saying she felt, as she's felt for a number of years, that at some point there will be an intifada within Israel amongst the Palestinian community there. And Fatima, I think said it, that everybody is all Palestinians are so annoyed now, so bound together now, whether they're in Shatila or Ain al-Elweg refugee camp in Gaza, in the West Bank, or indeed within Israel, everybody's working together. Could this be a new development? Leading to obviously unfortunately more violence, but could that be a shift? And how does the panel think that might change things if within Israel, the Israelis, who are so brutal, as we know, and are being ever more brutal even in Gaza this time than ever before, perhaps, how would they react to such an intifada, and how would that, do they think that might affect the international view of the situation?
Massa, would you like to answer that question? If you could just unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Just press mute.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just unmuting. I don't know if I have an answer for this question, but from my own opinion, that the situation is really changing. And I think that what is happening now definitely sounds like a third intifada. What will happen, I believe that changing policies, changing laws is extremely difficult for anyone outside the country or even inside the country to really have enough influence to do this. I believe that change, as I mentioned before, will come from people. And maybe, unfortunately, many, maybe thousands may pay a huge price for what is happening now, for the voices to be heard. But things are definitely changing. And if it doesn't happen from the inside, and also as well by the support of people or Palestinians or believers in the cause of humanity from the outside of Palestine, I think change will not happen, because everything is already taken care of in terms of allowing Israelis to do what they're doing now. So I think it has to come from inside, from people themselves, from people outside of Palestine supporting people inside of Palestine. And it seems like it's going to be a very painful journey if they really want to have their freedom and to regain their homes again. It will not happen by influencing laws or policies. I don't see it happening in that way.
Would any of the other speakers like to comment on the situation within Israel? Yes, Fatima.
Yes. How it is how it is different and how it is now what's happening inside Israel. I have friends in Haifa, and they used to tell me, oh no, we have a good relationship with the Israelis and the Jewish community, and suddenly I've got all of these text message from them saying it's different now. This is the first thing. It is different. It's different. They're sending them saying, we are going to kill we are going to kill you. They're shouting and not shouting. They are even saying we want to kill them, to rape their women, to, you know, they are just trying to threaten the community. And you've seen it, I don't know if you may have seen it in the news, that the police are protecting those groups who are like, you know, very fundamental groups coming outside, and they don't know who they are, but they come and they shout at them, and they're protected by the police, and they even attacking the Palestinians inside their houses in Israeli cities like, you know, Haifa or Akka. We've seen it in the news. But she's saying to me, this is different today because we don't feel safe. In this case, if these people are Israelis, between brackets, they are citizens of Israel, and they don't have this right, and they feel the fear of that. So it is applicable for us, because we know this, that happened to us before, as my family happened to them, and they had to leave because of the massacre. So are we going to see another massacre now inside Israel by these, you know, groups who are attacking the Arab Israelis? So this is like raising the issue about human rights and the citizenship of Israelis who are inside Israel. The second thing, I would stick to the international community and international law for the Palestinian right. The 194, which is the right of return, we have different issue. I would stick to these things, and I will rely on the people like you who are supporting Palestinians, and rely on the international community who can, you know, speak on behalf of us to give justice to the Palestinians. We're not asking for them. We are just asking for our human right within the you know, within this issue about Palestine. The other thing I would like just to come on is like, it is not about, you know, Israelis and Arab, or it is about human rights. It's about our right within, you know, the Israelis don't want us to give, they don't want to give us any state or any legitimation of right of return. And this is where the issue is not about one state solution or two state solution. They don't want us to they don't want to give us anything. They want a Jewish state, which is radical idea. If they are talking about Jewish state, maybe somebody else, they would come and say, we want also an Islamic state. We have also Druze. They may come and say, we want also a Druze state, or maybe the British men that they were there also, they maybe wanted a British state in Palestine. So it's not logic, it's not acceptable. And what we have been, you know, experience here is the anti-Semitic. If we speak up, they are claiming that we are anti-Semitic. And this is like, where is our right of freedom to speak about these things? I am concerned about this now here, and I would raise my voice with other people who, yes, just today in the morning in the LBC radio, they were talking about a woman, a Palestinian woman, who talked about what's happening in Palestine, and they called her anti-Semitic, and they wanted her to apologize. This is what's happening now in the ground in the British society. I want to talk about these things. Just thank you, but I just wanted to raise.
Yeah, no, I want to follow on. A couple of people have made comments about contacting our MPs, and it's true that in this area where we are, we have two Lib Dem MPs who are generally sympathetic, but the question is how to get them to raise their heads above the parapet. So it's all very well expressing sympathy, and you know, you send an email and you get a sort of standard reply. Caroline and Martin have said that. I don't know whether Bashir or Iyas have anything to say. How do we get our MPs to move forward and to speak openly? And the same, Kate from the US. There are movements, especially in the Democratic Party, to be more critical of Israel. But how does the current momentum of what's going on in Israel and Palestine at the moment get translated into action from our politicians? Bashir or Iyas, maybe?
So
Go ahead, Bashar.
Well, I was just going to say that I find that writing to MPs is often may or may not be helpful in the very short term for dealing with short-term issues. But if you really want MPs to have an impact, you've got to try and get a whole load of people to write to MPs who don't have Palestinian sounding names as well. And I think part of the strategy is also to try and persuade other people who on the face of it don't have a connection with this issue to actually also write to the MPs. And that's a longer term process in which you engage with your community. So a lot of us here are pro-Palestinians. We probably write letters in a particular way to our MPs, and they've probably seen those letters many times before. And the key is to try and get authentic voices from multiple parts of the communities, not template letters,
Yes.
to try and make to have that influence. And the other is to encourage other people to be MPs. So now
Yes.
it sounds bizarre, but in 10, 15, 20 years, if they're MPs, if we have more Leila Morans or more Talib congresswomen and so on, then those are the kinds of things that we have to achieve. You know, we've waited 73 years. We might have to wait much longer. So we might as well have a long-term strategy as well. I think it's really important to have a loud voice now and to raise awareness now, but engagement will get us the longer-term benefit, and that takes time as well.
Thank you.
If I
yes,
may,
do you want to comment?
Yeah, I look at it three things which overlap with what Bashar said. One is numbers. Numbers matter. Numbers genuinely matter. So do it yourself, but get as many people as you know, even friends as favors, buy them a beer and have them send emails, right? It really doesn't matter. Numbers count. Second thing is education. We need to educate our MPs. A lot of them don't know. And a lot of them also, it's looking beyond what's happening right now. We need to get our MPs to understand that we can go on forever saying, oh, but the Palestinians did this, oh, but the Israelis did that, oh, but then the Palestinians... Forget all of that. There is a fundamental issue, which is the theft of land from a people that lived there. And they need to always come back and understand that that is the fundamental issue. And we can go on about, but Hamas did, but the IDF did, but Fatah did, but we can do that ad nauseam. The key issue is there is a dispossessed people. And that people, that dispossession is the cause of everything that's happened since. So the education for me is the second thing. And the third thing is confidence. We need to give them confidence to speak out. Because at the moment, they will feel that they'll get shot down because of how big anti-Semitism is in the UK. We need to give them the confidence to be able to rebut those and understand why it's not anti-Semitic, understand on the ground that there are other things other than the IHRA definition, the Jerusalem Declaration. There are other definitions of anti-Semitism that have been proposed by Jews that explicitly talk about anti-Semitism not being criticism of Israel. So we need to do all of those things, and as Bashar said, accept that it's going to be a long process. They're all at different places on the journey. We need to take them down that journey relentlessly.
Can I add just one small thing? I listened to Newsnight last night, and there was Danny Finkelstein having a debate against someone else called Rivka Brown, and they were both Jewish, but on very different sides of the spectrum. And helping people like Rivka Brown engage will be the sort of thing that we can really do to help the debate, because it's coming from it's a debate within the Jewish community itself. And you know, Danny Finkelstein was belittling her by saying that's a small proportion of the Jewish community who feel like you. Well, let's help them make it a bigger part of the Jewish community. And I think these are the kinds of strategic thinking that we have to try and apply and think about. And it might require us to engage in difficult conversations with people we don't normally engage with.
And the media, I mean, the BBC, I think, started off the week or 10 days being very, very biased and, you know, here we go again, but slowly creeping in. You know, there have been other voices, and it's been good to see Jeremy Bowen, at least, you know, he's a bit more articulate than the other correspondents there. So
hope you don't mind me stepping in, but Jeremy Bowen got slapped down in flames, didn't he, for speaking out?
Yeah, probably, yes.
No, he did. I mean, I have to say, I work for the BBC, and so I have to be very careful what I say. But poor Jeremy did get slapped down, so he's got to be quite careful what he says.
Just a very interesting article in yesterday's Guardian, a Jewish case for Palestinian refugee return.
Oh, okay.
A really, really interesting article. Sorry, Dr. Salim, you have something to say.
Yes. Well, what I want that we rely a lot on building bridges of peace, not with politicians, but with simple people, friendly people in all around the world. And if we succeed to convince as much as we can simple people in Europe, in the United States, that we are not terrorists, we are human beings, and we are seeking useful and peaceful life, and that we want our human rights to live in better conditions and to have our human rights. This is a great thing and a great step that we hope to do it with all friends in all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody else got a question? I put a question right at the front to Dr. Salim. Can you explain to us when Palestinians are evicted from their homes in East Jerusalem, where do they go? Do they come to your camp? Do they go to live with relatives? Very large numbers have been evicted. Where have they gone?
Usually they go to live with their relatives.
So,
and if they have some money, they rent an apartment or they rent a house to live in. But the most of them, they go to their relatives because life is very expensive in East Jerusalem.
and of course, because they can't expand their buildings,
Yeah,
families become more.
Well, this is another story. It's not easy to have a permission to expand your home or your building. You need many stages until you get the permission, and 99% your request is refused by the Israel municipality.
Yes, yes. Thank you. I don't think we've got any, thank you very much. I don't think we've got any more questions or hands up. So we have hit 9 o'clock, which was the time to end. I don't know, James, if you...
Yes, it's probably about time to bring it to an end. And if I could just pass it over to Ias and in his role as chair of the Kingston and Richmond branch, as he wants to say a couple of things.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted, and I'm sure James would say the same, I wanted to thank everybody here for coming. It means a huge amount to us as Palestinians. The Palestinians, we do this because it's our nation. We do this because we're suffering. We see our people suffering. It's in our blood to resist. You're here because you're sympathizing with us. You're not here because it's in your blood. You're here it's because of your conscience. And that means a huge, huge amount to us as Palestinians. Please don't ever underestimate that, and please continue that support. So just to say thank you for coming here to support us and for all that you do outside of this meeting as well. I also want to say I am hopeful. A lot of Palestinians I speak to are also hopeful. We're hopeful because we see the tide, we see the numbers increasing, we see you coming, we see you bringing more people, and that's important. I believe Israel's South Africa moment is coming. If you look at it, it looked like nothing was happening, then suddenly everything happened. And that's what we're going through. A lot of the things that are happening now, we are mainstreaming apartheid. Suddenly, I'm not looked at as some lunatic when I talk about apartheid in Israel. That's a huge step. Admittedly, there are some who will still look at me as a lunatic, but a lot fewer than before. So, but that happens because we continue to mainstream the discussions. So keep on having those discussions. Keep on talking to other people about them. Keep on normalizing the view of what Israel actually is in reality. So I am hopeful. I'm also hopeful because, as Dr. Salim mentioned, the younger generation in Palestine, but also the younger generation outside. My 17-year-old child, he's 2 generations in. He barely speaks a word of Arabic. He's out marching. He's out trying to cajole everybody in his school to actually, he became head boy in his school, which I think was a secret ploy to actually get more on our side. So I'm hopeful for a number of reasons, but the biggest part of that hope translates to what we can actually do. Do continue with the grassroots. As we said, the numbers matter. At some point, the government can't ignore what we're doing if we build up the numbers. Talking to the MPs, as we've discussed on several times, matters. The intersectionality matters. Talk to the groups that you belong to. If you're a doctor, talk in your hospitals. If you're an architect, talk in your architect practices. Because actually all of those things are issues in Palestine, and all of those are issues that can be discussed. And talk to your contacts, talk to your mates, bring them along. So just wanted to say thank you very much on behalf of the speakers as well, because I know we're all grateful that you've come and listened to us and to hear the story of the Nakba. And thank you on behalf of the Richmond and Kingston branch, and I'll hand you back to James.
Yes, and if I can add my thanks as well to the wonderful speakers. As I say, it's very moving to hear your accounts of your histories and what your experiences are. Also, a big thanks to everybody who's attended this webinar. And I mean, we know that you are the people who are paying attention to this, and you are the people who are spreading the word. Just to say, in terms of how to do that, as I think has been mentioned, there's going to be there was a very big demonstration last Saturday, which apparently about 150,000 people turned up in London. There's been the Palestine Solidarity Campaign is organising another very big demonstration for this Saturday, and trying to get absolutely as many people as possible to turn up together on the Saturday, and trying to get even larger numbers out. I don't know the precise details of that, but if you go to the website, which is palestinecampaign.org, the details will no doubt be there. And also, if you are not a member of PSC, please can I encourage you to join. PSC is the largest and most significant organisation working for Palestinian rights in the UK. And the more people join up, the more it can do, the more pressure it can put on our government to support Palestinian rights, the more resources it has. So do please join. And then also at the weekend, West Surrey and Kingston are also planning further events. Kingston and Richmond will have a stall in Kingston between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m, which you can get information about from their Facebook page. And West Surrey are planning a demonstration for Sunday, which we haven't yet finalised, but keep an eye on our Facebook page as well, and we'll be sending details out. And then just finally again to say about donations, I put the link on the chat to the donations page, so please do make a donation if you possibly can. And I think that's all for now.
James, Dr. Salim would like to speak again.
Oh, sorry. Salim, please come in.
Yes, just 2 words. Please go on with these marches. We feel that we are not alone, and this gives us more energy, as I said. And we see that we have partners, we have friends who are on our side. And sure, we are sure that your MPs one day they will look on the TV and they will see what you are doing, and they will start to ask why and for what and these things. So please go on. This is our way of raising our voice through you and through these marches that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, well, I'm sure that the demonstrations will continue. Okay, so again, thanks to everybody for attending, and I think I can say we are now closing the meeting.